Howdy folks, Tex Grebner here with Tex Grebner Outdoors. Welcome to Illinois Archery Season 2017. This is going to be a full-length documentary, start to finish, of my entire archery season here in Illinois. Now obviously, I'm a traditional bow hunter. There ain't a person in the first world that actually traditional bow hunts for the meat. There are easier ways of doing things, and stores exist. More advanced equipment exists. I'm not going to lie to you. I hunt purely and utterly for thrill of the chase, for the sport of it all. And by God, the majestic whitetail runs me a merry chase. I am a legend amongst whitetail, simply because they use me as a rite of passage. Have you counted coup with the great Tex Grebner yet? He was almost within touching distance of me, and I managed to escape. So I'm kind of like a whitetail rite of passage in the sense of hunting being a time-honored rite of passage. So I'm a traditional bow hunter. It's what I do. It's how I do business. And I've done plenty of things in my life that I'm not proud of, and frankly, I'm done doing them. So there will be times within this documentary that you will probably be screaming at your screen for me to shoot this deer. There are times that you will be screaming, "Stop moving so much." Well, the answer is, when you bow hunt on film as a solo crew, it complicates things even more than traditional bow hunting already complicates them. So, while I am not necessarily a successful bow hunter, I am at least a legend amongst the whitetail because they use me for counting coup. However, hunting and telling hunting stories is a time-honored human tradition that runs through all cultures. So welcome to my cyber campfire. And such is the way of our people, since first we struck fire from living rock. Let me tell you a hunting story. We are literally within hours of Illinois Archery Season 2017 for whitetail here in Illinois. And people think that I'm a pessimist, but I've got a little bit of a checklist here that I need to accomplish in order for everything to go right. First of all, I need to be in there before dawn. Secondly, I need to pick the right spot to be in before dawn. I need to sit still. I need to be quiet. I need the wind to be in the proper direction. A deer needs to pick the spot that I am sitting in and walk within 15 yards of me. I then need to make sure that all my cameras are properly running, because if it didn't happen on film, it didn't happen. That's just the way that it works. And hunting on film is difficult. So then, once I know that I've got all my cameras running, I need to not only have picked the right spot to sit in, to where a deer is actually going to show up within 15 yards, I now need to execute a textbook shot. Because a lot of people have delusions of grandeur about their skill level. The fact is, in an adrenalized state, you do not rise to your level of training. You fall to your level of mastery. That's not coming from me. That is tactical facts. So I need to execute a perfect shot to kill cleanly and quickly. And then the animal needs to drop in a place that I can actually get to it, to be able to recover my game animal. then I need to get it packed out. Now, I am no expert about following up a blood trail, but I do know for a fact, and it scares me to think that I might get everything else perfect and then be screwed over by having a bad blood trail or having the deer die in a very inopportune, inaccessible place and not being able to recover it. So that's what's weighing on my mind as I get ready for the season tomorrow. Now, people think that I'm too much of a pessimist, but I've been at this too long to have any vestiges left of optimism. The animal needs to show up. I need to pick the right spot to be in. I need to be there, and an animal needs to decide that that animal wants to be where I am, and I need to execute a perfect killing shot, because there are no do-overs. The moment of truth is when life and death hang in the balance. And it's how many feathers, how many tiny details does it take to balance a brick. Now, when that arrow goes across the sky, that is the moment of truth. I have made ethical mistakes in my career, and because of that, I am unwilling to be moved against my moral compass ever again. Frankly, while I would like to be successful, I am unwilling to compromise in what and how I want to accomplish it. There's so much of the hunt that is a visceral mystery. If you don't know what visceral means, look it up. There's so much pressure. There's so much that needs to go exactly right. But right here to right here, and right here to right here, that's what I'm working with. And everything has to be perfect. It is always special to be in the woods as a human predator and to take part in the spiritual experience of the hunt. But the greatest time of the entire year, the absolute greatest time for a hunter, is the hour of darkness before dawn on opening day of bow season. Because we have spent months dreaming of opening day since we left the woods at the end of the last season. We have spent months hoping, praying, plotting, scheming, working hard to nail down our quarry. But in the end, nothing is certain. Such is the visceral mystery of the hunt. But all that plotting, hoping, scheming, daydreaming, and night dreaming exists within that darkness, within that cold, misty morning just before dawn. And all hunters know and understand that in that darkness, your mind will create deer of your dreams that walk down your trail. You see, it's ironic how trail camera pictures in infrared actually give the deer an ethereal, spectral quality. And so when we dream as hunters, it's entirely possible to see these mystical stags walking our trails. But in that darkness before dawn, opening day of deer season, that is the greatest time of year. That is the absolute greatest time. Because in that darkness, that is where our dreams can live. Before the cruel light of dawn washes away the phantasmagoria and leaves us with nothing but cruel, bleak reality. And the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, bow hunting is hard. I have a really hard time sitting still when I'm deer hunting. I guess I just am so excited about being in the woods that I don't really know what to do with myself. I want it now. But waiting takes more mental toughness, in my opinion, than any physical act that I have ever done. However, I did have some good feedback from my trail cameras at this particular spot. And so when I had to leave the woods, I checked my card. And I decided that I was going to set up across the way from where I had been sitting in a deadfall next to the cornfield, that I was going to take this particular trail. It had warmed up quite a bit from the morning chill, and the wind wasn't quite good, but wasn't quite bad. You never truly know when you're hunting what's going to happen, and I get so very excited that if a squirrel scurries up a corn stalk, it will make me about have a heart attack. Opening day is the greatest time of year. It truly is, because it's where you get to go back to bow hunting with all of its incredible highs of excitement and all the disappointments of reality. Sitting, watching, waiting, listening, familiarizing myself with my equipment, hoping and praying that this would be the year, this would be the day that I would break my whitetail curse. The sun started to go down little by little. The air became a bit cooler and the wind began to die. The bugs came out and I was almost on sensation overload, completely wrapped with excitement, my arms and shoulders aching from being tense, ready for an impending moment of truth. But as the shooting light faded, it was not to be. Such is the visceral mystery of the sacred act of hunting. And the slow descent into madness begins. That is the end of opening day. All I saw all day was squirrels. Hope is a lie. It's that little lie we tell ourselves to get out of bed each morning, that there's hope for a new day. Now, in the darkness, that hope can live. There are few things in life more majestic than watching the daylight come into the wild. It was the kind of morning that all Midwestern whitetail hunters dream about. There was a misty rain. It was pleasant weather. Not too hot, not too cold, and the wind was absolutely perfect for this setup in my Christmas tree blind. I had worked very hard on engineering this ambush, and I knew that it had great potential to offer me the shot that I was looking for. But the morning went on, watching, waiting, listening, and as the morning goes on even further, I was very tired because it had started out at 4 to get ready. The sun had come out and it was getting humid, and so I was enjoying the weather while questioning, why the hell am I even still here? But I had hoped that with the rain I would see a deer taking this trail. Now I confess myself to be very frustrated because this trail camera had almost constantly had deer on it before the season. But now that season was well into being, there was nothing. I was shocked, surprised, and frustrated. And yet, you never truly know what will happen in the woods. So I was trying out my cattail mat blind in the afternoon after I got done working. But I was very disappointed to find that in that thorn bush, a robin had built a nest. And that was enough to trigger my trail camera. So I had no deer pictures whatsoever on that trail camera. And so I moved. My trail camera had also been drained of batteries. Now sitting up on the hill where I had seen the big 10-pointer last season, staring fixedly ahead, hoping and praying that if I stared hard enough and sat still enough that as the evening came on, that a buck or a doe might materialize in the spot that I sat watching. However, I confess myself to be very frustrated because I would have been happy to have even been busted by a deer. But the complete lack of activity on my trail cameras was very frustrating because this season was supposed to be different. I really do not like waking up really early in the morning, but my favorite time to hunt is in the morning. Partly because of the mystery and the hope that anything is possible on a brand new day, but also because it seems much more likely in the morning to be able to intercept deer on the way back to their beds rather than in the evening waiting on them to leave their beds. It was the perfect early October morning. It was a drizzling rain, pleasantly cool, but not god-awful chilly. And as the sun started to rise higher and higher, I thought, this could be the day. Now I was set up alongside the property line with a well-worn deer trail next to me where they jumped the fence. And I was waiting next to the cornfield corner to see if I could spot a deer coming to jump the fence or coming back from the other property line in order to be able to ambush it in a crossfire on its way to the cornfield. Everything was so absolutely perfect. Perfect wind, perfect weather, so perfect. And yet as the sun gets higher and higher yet again, you start to wonder, why the hell am I even out here? Am I even going to see anything at all? And then a squirrel will rustle a leaf, or a bird will flush out of the corn, and you will think, holy crap, is that a deer? And you will convince yourself to sit just a little bit longer. But you see, deer are wild and free majestic creatures, at least if you're hunting them under free-range circumstances. And it does not matter how much you paid for your gear. It doesn't matter what brand of bow that you shoot. It doesn't matter how many trail camera pictures that you actually have if nothing shows up. Deer, being wild and free, majestic creatures, get to change their mind whenever they want. And I have to hunt them on their terms. So as the sun rose higher and higher and my real life responsibilities began to take precedent, I made up my mind that I would finally leave. It had rained almost all night, and so my approach around the cornfield to my ambush was practically silent. Now, rain can be your ally because it will cover your approach. It will also wash away your scent, but it can also be your enemy because rain will wash out a blood trail in a hurry. And so I am very loath to actually hunt on an evening rain for fear of losing my game, even if I make a good shot and being unable to recover it due to complications from rain and darkness and so on. But I was secreted away on the corner of the cornfield, sitting on the fence row of the property line, hoping to ambush a deer as it came around the edge of the cornfield where they had the corn crushed down. I had a good solid crosswind, and as the morning went on, I thought, perhaps I will break my curse today. Watching, waiting, listening, fidgeting, hoping, praying, and then realizing that as the sun gets higher, the likelihood of seeing anything drastically drops. However, the visceral mystery of the hunt is even against your better judgment when you think, I'm probably never going to see anything. You think, well, maybe I could. So you put on your boots, you take up your bow, and you join in the visceral mystery of the hunt. Because you can't accomplish a goal unless you're there, no matter how unlikely it seems as the morning goes on. The wind had changed a bit and was blowing straight on the back of my neck, but I hoped that that might be good in case a deer came to cross the fence to feed upon the fallen corn stalks. There is a special kind of excitement that comes from the freedom to dream as a hunter, the freedom of imagination in the face of cold, bleak reality. But the weather was pleasant, and my spirit was undampened despite the fact that I was clueless as to where the deer might be. After my morning hunt had came to a conclusion, I was a bit disheartened, I confess, not having any kind of clue where the deer might be, because all my intelligence that I had gathered pointed to the spots that I had been sitting in. But yet, the deer had simply not showed up. I knew for a fact that in past years I had seen deer pass exactly by these exact spots. And yet, frustratingly enough, the high-stakes game of whack-a-mole, the slow descent into madness that is my deer season, continues. Watching, waiting, listening, hoping, praying, dreaming, fidgeting. It had rained and rained and rained all day while I was out of the woods. And so I had decided that I was going to try a different hunting location. You see, if you don't know where to start, go back to the beginning. And I had not a clue where I might find deer. So rather than hunting on my hunting permission property, I decided that I was going to go back and hunt my family's cattle pasture. And so I decided that I was going to secret myself away on a camp chair behind a bush and wait and hope and pray that with the rain done with, that the deer might be moving through. So I had scaled my way down a steep hill into this thicket at the base of the hill with the creek behind me, hoping that a deer would come through this thicket, hoping that a buck would come to rub on these trees, because year after year I had always found rubs in this location. And while it was early for rubs, you never truly know when it comes to hunting. Nothing is guaranteed. And so secreted behind my bush, watching out into the thicket, the wind was calm, the birds were singing, the blue jays were fighting with the squirrels, and the geese had flown overhead. Everything was green and lush and pleasant and beautiful. Everything was so utterly fantastic with the calm wind that I was able to convince myself that tonight might be the night, that everything for once would go absolutely right. But as the night came down, I was proven wrong, and the slow descent into madness continues. Illinois Archery Season 2017. Part of the joy of bow hunting is the challenge, the facing the unknown, the figuring out the quarry, the skill set involved, and the taking of an animal with ethics, honor, skill, and a healthy pinch of luck. I had been set up on this hillside stand all afternoon, watching, waiting, listening. Occasionally I would hear birds flushing from the corn stalks. And that is truly a cruel joke, because to hear a bird or a squirrel scurrying around in the cornfield up and down the stalks as they want to do, it sounds exactly like you would imagine a buck's antlers scraping the ears of corn as he walks with his massive rack through the corn. And it's entirely possible that it could be a buck's rack scraping the ears of corn, because once you get more than 3 rows into a cornfield, you really can't see what's going on in the further rows. Now, I didn't have high expectations for this hunt, but you can't know what's going to happen unless you're there to see it for yourself. And there's only so many trails that the deer can take. And so the high-stakes game of whack-a-mole, the slow descent into madness, goes on and on. But I continued to hunt and sit as still as I possibly could, which is something that I am very not good at, because as the magic hour approaches, the excitement builds, because you know the deer will move. You hope that they will move near you. You do not know. But I wasn't hopeful, because I had no deer activity on my trail camera whatsoever. The only pictures that I had were me walking away from my camera and walking into my stand. But still I sat, excited, hoping, praying, watching, waiting, wondering, and enjoying the agony and the ecstasy of the visceral mystery of the hunt. I am only one man. I am a feeble human hunter against all the cruel japes that nature can play on a man in the wild. But as long as I live, I will continue the hunt. The wind was out of the totally wrong direction, but it had been raining most of the day, and so I had the chance to go hunting. I, like most of you that have to live in real life with real conditions, hunt whitetail under less than favorable circumstances. I was still absolutely clueless as to where the deer might be, but I had decided to hunt this stand, sitting huddled behind my Christmas trees, hoping against hope that in the evening a deer would take this trail. Never knowing, always wondering, there is great excitement, and the greater the excitement, the more bitter the disappointment. And there are times that you will think, I'm probably not going to see anything at all. But there is that slim chance, that chance for a buck of a lifetime that will get you out there and make you stay. The rain had stopped, but the wind was gusting. I won't go so far as to say that everything was perfect, because it wasn't. It was just another hunt, but at least it was not a comedy of errors. As the evening went on, I sat, still as I possibly could. One really good thing about the rain is that it makes you like a ghost going into the timber. I train and I practice obsessively with my archery equipment. But in truth, all skill is in vain if an angel pisses in your musket. It doesn't matter how good of a shot you are if nothing shows up. But at least the weather was pleasant enough being warm for October, which is an ironic problem to have, because it means that deer are unlikely to move until the last light of the day. As the light began to fade, my excitement grew almost uncontainably, because there's always that chance, no matter how slim, that this might be the hunt that I break my whitetail curse. And you never truly know. And that is the appeal of going into the woods as a hunter. The adventure and the unknown. These pictures are proof of why I say that whitetail hunting is like a high-stakes game of whack-a-mole. Because I had set a trail camera up on the point rows of a field where the deer had knocked it down on the corner. And I was able to capture some early morning images and some daylight activity. But naturally, it was when I was not there. And so I had a little camp chair stuck on the point rows of the field behind some tall foxtails, and I was waiting for dawn. Everything was so perfect. It had rained all night, so my approach was silent. All my scent that I may have left from the camera had been washed out, and the sun began to come up, and I could hardly contain my excitement, because the wind was perfect, the temperature was perfect. I knew that just yesterday I had had traffic in front of this very spot. Now, you see where I sit, and a lot of people think that I'm far too open in the way that I sit. But the reason that it appears that way is because I have to position the cameras at a different view than what a whitetail will have. And so, watching, waiting, listening, the crosswind holding, everything so absolutely perfect as the squirrels scurried up the corn stalks and the birds flew overhead. Never knowing, always wondering. There's a lot of reasons why I do what I do in the way that I do it. But to be quite honest with you, I've been chasing this dream for so long, I've practically forgotten all the reasons why. I don't even know why anymore. It's just what I do. But I knew that just yesterday morning there had been deer activity past this very spot. And I hoped that as the morning began to dry out, as the sun rose higher and higher, that a deer would be making its way around the edge of the field. But I had been up very early for this hunt, and I was getting tired. But I would much rather kill a deer in the morning. That way I have all day to do the tracking job just in case. And still I sat, wondering if I was truly cursed. But I was truly blessed to have been able to experience the type of October morning that all Midwestern whitetail hunters dream about. When we go into the woods on a hunt, there is no way of knowing what's going to happen. It's always a brand new adventure. And everything about this hunt was so absolutely perfect. The perfect ambush, the perfect place, the perfect weather, the perfect wind. Everything was so absolutely perfect. And I hiked in with my face red with excitement. You could have cooked an egg on my face. I was so very excited. I thought for sure something would happen tonight, that there would be deer movement. The wind was directly in my face. Everything was so utterly perfect. But then I began to question myself, wondering if a deer did show up, could I make a perfect shot? Would I be able to recover it? Would I be able to capture it all on film to bring you the hunting story? Watching, waiting, listening, and wondering these thoughts, I sat as still as I could, which is something that I am not very good at, and my excitement grew even greater, because as the sun slowly started to sink and the evening came on, the temperature dropped, and it was a misty, cool, almost cold at dusk, the type of October evening that all Midwestern whitetail hunters dream about. I thought for sure that there would be deer movement, and as dusk and dark came even closer, every time my eyes adjusted to the light, I got even more and more excited, sitting along the same spot that I had sat the morning hunt. Every single sound, every tiny gust of wind through the corn would send me through the roof. It is difficult for me to convey to you how excited and awesome this all was. I watched the corners of my vision for any sign of that majestic brown animal that we know as the whitetail. Any ivory of the antlers. Watching, waiting, listening, and yet again wondering, how would I even react to seeing a deer this close? Because if it was going to happen, it was going to be a very intimate encounter with nature and hunting at some of its most primal. But such is the ancient dance of predator and prey. The sun went down on yet another empty hunt, because there is no guarantee, and there cannot be disappointment without great love. I didn't have high expectations for this hunt, but with hunting you never really know, and there's only so many days in the deer season. So I decided that I was going to hunt this spot when I got done with the chores. That way I could check my trail camera. Now, I at least finally had some good activity and some fairly decent looking bucks. But the bad news was they were all there after dark. The good news was at least they were there. And it makes it difficult hunting whitetail when the crops are still in, because the crops will at least provide cover so that you aren't necessarily viewed on your way in. But the deer literally almost don't have to leave. They don't have to move during the daylight. But watching, waiting, listening, sitting on my camp stool behind the woodpile, I was determined that I was going to make the best of this hunt, even if I didn't think that I was going to see anything at all. Because the interesting thing about hunting is it can go from mind-numbing boredom to complete and utter ecstasy of excitement with the simple rustle of a leaf or the snap of a twig or the shuddering of a cornstalk. It is a visceral mystery. But there's only so many days in a deer season. And it's important, we feel that it is important, that is, that we get a deer early in the season. Everyone would love to kill a big one opening day. And the reason is because once you get to the rut, even though we all love hunting the rut, once you get to the rut, the season, for the practical purposes, is almost gone when you're actually going to have good deer activity. But as the night came on and the shadows started to lengthen, against my better judgment, I got excited because the magic hour was here, waiting for an impending moment of truth and hoping that that buck might come around the corner of the cornfield and right past me before the darkness came in. The fall rains had made the ground soft and wet the leaves that had fallen, and so my approach in the darkness had been silent. However, the rain had another problem in store, because I had to scale a slippery ridge to get down to this walnut grove that I was secreted away in, hoping that a buck would come through the walnut grove to start making rubs at the first light of the day, wondering, watching, waiting, listening to the morning bird songs, and enjoying the sunrise, awake since ridiculously early, and so utterly excited, experiencing the visceral mystery of the hunt. The creek behind me, the walnut grove in front of me, the wind blowing across me, perfect, absolutely perfect for the ambush of whatever might happen by to offer me under a 12-yard shot from one side of the grove to the other. The perfect kill zone. But yet, it doesn't matter, because the simple fact is, hunting is a visceral mystery. And nothing matters how much everything else is perfect if nothing shows up. It was one of those gray, windy fall evenings. The type of evening where it seems like almost anything is possible. But yet, with hunting, you never really know. There's always the potential for something to happen. But yet there's always that chaotic unknown of all the unknown, and yet even more unknown variables that go into everything about hunting that you, the hunter, can't control. And so while I was sitting, watching, waiting, and listening to the wind blow in my face across the corn stalks, I was set up alongside of a water trail. Behind me was a bluff, and in front of the bluff, directly behind me, there was a woodpile. And so I was secreted away in a little alcove alongside of a deer path down the bluff. Now it was a wet, chilly wind that was in my face, so I didn't really expect anything to be traveling down the water trail that I had found. But I figured that it was at least a well-used travel route, that the laws of randomness might bless me with a whitetail encounter. But while I was sitting there watching, waiting, listening, I decided in my mind that I was having a conversation with myself and somewhat ranting, because we all love watching hunting shows. Everybody loves watching hunting shows. But you see, the trouble is, a lot of successful hunters are unwilling to actually put in the effort to take a camera into the woods with them. Not only because it is extra work to actually learn how to film and learn how to edit and learn how to tell a story through voiceover, because without editing and without voiceover, it's nothing but moving pictures with absolutely no context, and the real tree whisper is complete bullshit. But while there is the extra work of filming, most hunters are completely unwilling to film, because while they are successful, they are afraid that the act of filming will jeopardize their success. So while everybody loves to watch hunting shows, very few people independently are willing to take the risk of jeopardizing their success in order to tell a hunting story. But as the magic hour came on, everything was so absolutely perfect. The wind had calmed down, and anything was possible. My neck and shoulders ached from being clenched with anticipation of action, ready and waiting for a buck to take this trail, or even a doe, never knowing and always wondering about the visceral mystery of the hunt. It's a beautiful October night, and I would like nothing more than to be sitting on a camp chair waiting on a buck to probably not show up. But it's a little bit later than I would like to get into the woods, and I'd probably just be busting deer all over the place as I walked in instead of busting a buck. So I'm taking this night to kind of refamiliarize myself with my equipment, because the more that I hunt, the less that I tend to have time to practice, and as the season goes on, I know that my shooting is going to be degraded because of it. So we're back here in the backyard, 20 yards away. And there's an old proverb, and it goes, if you get close enough, your aim will be true enough. And to be quite honest with you, I want them where I can't miss. One that's a little bit high, but at least they're all in the same straight line. So that's at least confidence inspiring, because I don't want to be taking shots in the field that I'm not confident in. A little bit better grouping. I tend to really hug that front shoulder just because I do not want to get into the guts. I hear all the time about how much of a pessimist that I am when it comes to bow hunting. And I guess that's true, but it's only true because I know how this stuff goes down. I'm gonna go out, I'm not gonna see shit, and I'm gonna sit for hours. But even knowing that, I had decided that I was gonna go hunting after I got done with chores. And so I climbed into my cattail blind that I'd put next to the gap in the fence. And it had been windy literally all day. It had just been blowing its guts out. But I knew that near dusk it would probably get real calm. And while the wind was not necessarily ideal, it did get calm about the time that I got really excited, because I saw 3 does working their way across the top of the hill. I didn't bother screwing around trying to get the camera on them before they disappeared into the weeds. I just hoped that they might circle back around and come to the gap in the fence, and I might be able to get a shot at them. But I went from super bored to super excited in the blink of one whitetail's eye. But you never truly know until you've been there and experienced it. And every day is the same, but every day is just a little bit different. And I was at least encouraged by the fact that I had seen a deer. But I was even more confused because the high-stakes game of whack-a-mole continues. They had taken a trail that I happened to not be waiting in ambush on. With chores, I had got into the woods later than what I wanted to, but yet it had been a very warm October day, almost too warm for mid-October. So it was pleasant conditions, but too nice for deer hunting, as ironic as that sounds. So I wasn't terribly worried about the fact that I had gotten in late, because with as warm as it was, I didn't expect any movement until it got very close to dusk in the magic hour, when anything is possible. Sitting behind a bush, directly on the trail that those 3 does had taken last week, watching, waiting, listening, getting excited against my own better judgment. Every time a tall grass stalk would sway, or something would rustle the corn, even though I knew it was the wind, my heart would be in my throat, and I would be ready for action. The sun began to dip down little by little, and it began to cool, and the wind began to calm. Now, the wind wasn't necessarily in the right direction for this spot. But with that being said, I never, ever actually get to hunt deer under ideal conditions, because I live in reality, and that's just the way my life works. Sitting behind this bush, hoping and praying, wondering and waiting, and so dreadfully excited I almost trembled as the sun continued to dip down and the shadows began to lengthen, because the magic hour was upon me, where anything is possible, and there is no knowing what will happen until you have seen it. But when you are hunting wild and free, majestic creatures, there is no predicting them. They get to change their minds, they get to do what they want, and there is no way to make them do something other than what they already want to do. Such is the appeal and such is the challenge. I had been so very excited, but as the shooting light faded even more rapidly, I realized that this would be yet another empty hunt, and the slow descent into madness continues. I never sleep well before a morning hunt. I will lay awake in the darkness of my bedroom, staring at the ceiling and daydreaming in my mind, plotting and scheming, envisioning what might happen in the darkness of the woods. I had left for the woods well before daylight, and the morning dew had wet the leaves as I made my way into the timber around the cornfield. I had had no activity whatsoever when I pulled my trail camera cards last night, and I was a little bit confused. But with the deer nowhere to be found and not knowing where the deer might be, I guess that means the deer could be anywhere. My favorite time is the time just before dawn, when anything is possible. And I was sitting on an alcove next to a trail around the cornfield underneath a white oak tree. The sunrise had been absolutely breathtaking as the combines droned in the distance. The sun grew higher and higher, and I could see where the deer had matted down the grass searching for the acorns. Everything was so absolutely perfect, with the morning chill and the wind in my face and a light rain pattering. Knowing that at any time a deer could happen down this trail around the cornfield, presenting me with an absolutely perfect broadside shot. Turn the cameras on, draw, fire. Every sound would send my heart into my throat. The wind held its position in my face. And still I sat, as still as I possibly could. There was a wood pile behind me, so I knew that the only approach would come from the front of me, wondering if the bucks would start rubbing on the saplings along the cornfield. Everything was so absolutely perfect. The only thing that it needed was for a deer actually to show up, never knowing what might happen. But that's just the way that hunting goes. Even if everything is perfect, the majestic whitetail lives by its own rules. I bring you the reality of bow hunting. I am very confused, and I was wondering, where are all the deer? And where might they be traveling? You see, I thought I had them figured out, to the point where I would finally be able to realize my dream of validating myself as a professional outdoorsman. Finally. Wondering, watching, listening to the birds twitter in the branches above my head, doing a terrible job of sitting still, as always, because I'm so very excited in the woods. The wind was in my face, and there was a wet chill in the air. The leaves were turning on the trees, and the magic hour came closer and closer. I was sat behind the bush again on my camp stool, waiting alongside the trail for such a simple ambush. All it needed was for a deer to step into my view with my cameras rolling. Hoping for anything to take my trail, I watched the corners of my vision as the shadows began to lengthen. But you see, you cannot take Mother Nature by force. All game under fair chase conditions must be a gift from God. The air was cool as the night came closer and closer, and everything was just right. The primal excitement began to take hold in me as the wind shook the leaves and the corn stalks rattled, and soft rain began to patter all around me. I peered into the shadows for any sign of deer. The rain continued to patter even harder, and the geese began to fly south. The hunt is a visceral mystery, and anything is possible in the magic hour. Hope fought with desperation in my mind and in my heart as I sat on my camp stool behind the bush, determined to wait until the very last of light, experiencing the visceral mystery of the hunt, my mind a phantasmagoria of bucks taking my trail, wondering, watching, listening. And yet I admit, it may seem incredibly foolish to some of you, my style of hunting. Sometimes plans are just dumb enough to work, and you never really know what may happen in the woods. In the high-stakes game of whack-a-mole that is bow hunting, I had been at the wrong place at the wrong time, and there was deer activity in front of one of my trail cameras earlier in the morning, while I had been forced to fulfill my real-life obligations, and the slow descent into madness continues as the wee folk of the woods continue to torment me, but I'm just so damn entertaining. Now, I know when I go out deer hunting that I'm probably not going to see anything at all. Not a damn thing. I know that because I've been conditioned to think that way, because that's the way life works. You don't just show up and the deer are like a shotgun blast across the timber all around you. That ain't how it works. I don't care what you think you know. Anybody that's really hunted whitetail knows that there is a high likelihood that you're not going to see a damn thing. And yet, even knowing that this was probably going to be an empty hunt, hoping that I was wrong, I made my way around the cornfield to the backside of the property to try and hunt the timber, hoping against hope that a buck would come by to rub on these saplings in front of my spot. Because you never really know, even though most of the time I end up being right and I don't see a damn thing. But this hunt had started off a bit rocky, because when I was making my way around the cornfield, because it had been raining almost all day, my approach was totally silent other than the swish swish of my pants against the wet grass and corn stalks, and I had practically walked up on a doe before she busted me. You see, the corn funnels me around the property, and the terrain funnels me around the property, where deer can basically go wherever they want, because they are wild and free, majestic creatures. Finally, everything was going to line up. Everything was so utterly perfect. I had the perfect wind. I had the perfect ambush. I had the perfect weather because it had turned cold overnight. And the greatest time of all is that darkness just before dawn. Because in that darkness, as I've said, that's where dreams can live. And I never sleep very well before a morning hunt because I'm constantly laying awake in bed, staring at my ceiling, envisioning deer walking down my trail, and playing it out in my head and mentally preparing. Now, I was set up alongside of a trail around the cornfield where I had had deer activity in the mornings. The wind was blowing directly across me from the field. It was cold and crisp and moist, and everything was so utterly, absolutely perfect as the morning moved on further into the day. Every squirrel, every bird would heighten my excitement, waiting for the action that was to come. Now, I will be honest with you, when you've had as many empty hunts as I have, it's like waking up on Christmas morning to this massive box, a box that can contain all your dreams. And you open the box, and it's completely empty. Empty. Completely empty. And the person that gives it to you says, "This empty box represents all the intangible things that go into the joy of the hunt." And frankly, you look right at them and you say, "Thank you for an empty box." Because at least with an empty box, I can crawl inside of it and pretend like it is something else. Because while this morning was completely perfect, the setup was perfect, everything was perfect, it required one key element, and that was for a deer of its own free will to decide to walk past me. Because I was set up 10 yards for a perfect shot, and nothing showed up, and I was forced to leave the woods for my real-life obligations. Back in the woods after I finished chores, and it was still a cold day. I was set up on a different spot, wondering, waiting, hoping, praying. The wind had changed during the day, and so I had chosen a different spot. Again, I was 10 yards off of a cornfield where they would be funneled down directly in front of me. In front of my little hideaway where I am shielded behind two bushes with a shooting lane in between for my cameras and my arrow, there was a crazy amount of deer tracks. This is the same spot that has the grass matted down next to it from the deer foraging for the acorns that dropped out of the white oak tree that I'm leaning up against. Everything was so absolutely perfect. It was so calm. The air was chilly, and the wind was in my face. Ready for action, wondering, hoping. The hunt is a visceral mystery. And sitting on my camp stool, I have no idea what is about to happen. But I can see it in my head. I can envision what I want to happen. And all I can do is wait for things to line up, wait for things to be absolutely right. The weather got even cooler as the sun started to sink and the magic hour approached rapidly. I knew that there was deer traffic in front of this spot. I had seen the tracks. The corn would funnel them right past me. And because I was tucked away behind the thick brush with only a shooting lane, all it would take would be for a deer to take the trail around the cornfield, offer me a 10-yard broadside shot, and it would be a done deal. But with free-range, fair chase whitetail hunting, There are no guarantees. I haven't had a chance to hunt in a couple of days. Haven't checked my trail cameras, and to be totally honest with you, I don't have a single clue what these deer are doing. It finally got a cold snap this week while I was out of the woods. But right now, I'm going into the timber, I'm going to pull my ground blind out, and I'm going to set it up somewhere else. Hopefully I'm going to have enough daylight to get that done so that I'm not having to work fell deeds by moonlight. But, you know, I admit I'm depressed, I'm frustrated, don't have a clue what these critters are doing. But as much as I say that I love the challenge, I completely admit that it seems unattainable most of the time. Even when everything is right, nothing else matters if them critters don't show up. So frankly, at this point, I don't know. So all I can do is just go out hunting. But right now, I'm fixing to go move around some stuff. Well, by God, I got lucky. Crocker done cut the cornfield. Fantastic. Oh, of course. Of course. There they are right now. Lols. Tex done got trolled. See him there? Hey, you. Oh, what a merry chase you run me. Now, see, here's the real funny thing. This is my family's cattle pasture that I used to hunt. And I still obviously can hunt it. But as you can see, it's mighty open. So I simply can't really hunt deer in there. Sitting in the frozen darkness, I had decided to hunt up on the thorn tree ridge, hoping to ambush deer coming out of the upper field back down the ridge. I was set up under a honey locust tree, and the wind was in my face. It was cold, and I knew there would be deer movement. One of the most beautiful things that you can witness in life is the terrible beauty of a frozen sunrise when the sun comes up and creates what I call a frost fire, where everything turns orange in a brilliant glow. The wind was in my face, which was not good when the deer were coming from behind me. I had not counted on them coming out from behind me, but I still got my bow at the ready in case the deer would come up the ridge, as I figured that it would. Watching the majestic whitetail move so gracefully, my heart was racing, shivering, and holding my bow at the ready with one hand and running the camera with the other, marveling at the simple majesty of the whitetail. There were weeds obscuring the deer now, and it was still very far away. But naturally, the deer had come from behind me and was in the wrong direction for the proper wind, and so, while it did not spook, it simply turned around and walked back to its bed. And so I still sat watching, waiting, listening, my hands back in my muff to keep them warm after waiting for the deer to come up the ridge, wondering if more deer might come out into the field, or come from the opposite direction that I had hoped that they would come from, but I at least had the chance to witness a whitetail and a majestic frost fire sunrise. So as you can tell, this hunt came to nothing. Did see a deer, but she didn't come up the hill to where I thought she was gonna. She turned around and went back into the woods. And so, after everything got settled down, and as you can see the sun's high, I went around and checked all my trail cameras and cleared off all the combine pictures. Didn't have hardly any deer pictures, but at least the corn is out. And I've been rearranging some of my spots now that the corn is out for better spots, but I wasn't able to film any of it just because it would have been too labor intensive, so you're just going to have to take my word for it. Right now I've got this stand set up on a tree that's actually got an old stand way up there. I'm only about 3 foot off the ground behind a multiflora rose bush and a wood pile here. So right here, that's where they come into the field at, and so I'm hopeful because it's getting cold and the rut should be starting soon. It was several days before I could get into the woods again, and so I was pleased to see that at the spot that I had rearranged into, that I did have deer on my trail camera. So that was at least promising. Now it had warmed up above freezing, and so while it was just above freezing, it was raining. And so, listening to the hypnotic sound of the rain, I was set up in a tree stand only about 8 feet off the ground, set in a catalpa tree's crotch, where I would be concealed should a deer come beneath me. Now I had heard the gas station rumors about the rut starting up and the bucks chasing the does, but I had yet to see any proof of it. But it didn't stop me from blowing a little cash on some estrus lure just because I'm superstitious like that. And I hoped that deer would be chasing through the cornfield into the cattle pasture where I was set up. Now you see, it's funny, because when I used to wear my Savage face paint, people used to tell me how stupid I looked. And then, when I stopped wearing it because it was too big of a pain in the ass to take off every time, I get to hear about how, oh, you stick out like a sore thumb. I can't seem to please the gods of the hunt, so it would seem. But sitting, watching, waiting, listening to the hypnotic sound of the rain, wondering if a buck would come through to my ambush in the morning, everything was perfect. But yet, being awake since the wee hours of the morning and spending most of the evening to the almost wee hours of the morning making sure that I had all my gear in order, I was tired. And it's difficult to sit for hours and hours and see nothing. And especially trying to stay awake with that hypnotic sound of rain, the occasional screaming blue jay. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy nature, but the slow descent into madness continues. All styles of hunting require certain skill levels and different kinds of endurance. Whitetail hunting is not so much physically demanding in its level of endurance. Whitetail hunting is more about mental toughness and being able to go out knowing that you're probably not going to see anything, sit for hours, hope and wonder and wait for the moment to be right. And even then, there's still no guarantee, just like this morning. The phantasmagoria of the pre-dawn darkness had seemed to last forever because of the heavy mist and clouds of the rainy, cold morning. The morning had been beautiful in its misery. I had decided that I was going to hunt the cattle pasture yet again, but I had met a doe in the field on my way in, and so I had my doubts about this hunt. But with hunting, you never really know, and I figured that there might have been more deer in the pasture. And so I decided that I was just going to commit to the hunt and make the best of it and see what happened. The rain had finally stopped. Now the wind was not ideal. There was almost no wind at all, but it was swirling around. And so there was a light, chilly mist in the air as the afternoon continued. Watching, waiting, having a heart attack every time a squirrel would rattle the branches or scamper along the drying leaves. Never knowing, always wondering, and there's a lot of inner monologue that goes into a hunt. Actually, I probably should say there's a lot of inner dialogue, because it's me talking with Tex Grebner, because there's always those voices in your judgment that say, I'm probably not going to see anything at all. Why the hell am I out here? God, I'm bored. And then a squirrel happens, and you have a heart attack. But squirrels can be the bane of your existence, and every Midwestern whitetail hunter knows that, because not only will they make you have deer stand heart attacks, because they sound like a 200-pound buck if the leaves are dry, but they're also really great at burning out your trail camera batteries, taking selfies by running up saplings. I like the way that squirrels taste, but I'm not a fan of squirrels while I'm deer hunting, even though they can be pretty entertaining to watch, even if it does sound a little dirty to watch a squirrel play with his nuts. With that being said, though, you never really know with hunting, because life is a beautiful, violent, visceral experience, and hunting is a visceral mystery. And so as the magic hour approached, I became excited, as I always do. It's a strange combination that you have when you're hunting, at least when you're stand hunting or sitting on the ground the way that I do. It's a combination of really excited and really bored. But there's also a lot of other things that go on in my mind while I'm sitting there, because there's part of me that says, screw it, you're not going to see shit, just go home. But there's that part of me that says, well, I'm out here, I can't make it happen if I'm not still out here, and I won't know until dark if nothing is going to show up. It has to be experienced. And there is a beautiful but terrible quality to the wild and the wilderness. While I'm not necessarily hunting in any kind of wilderness, that is, but there is a beautiful and terrible quality to the wild and the wilderness, because it is not only unpredictable, but it simply does not care. Nature does not care. It doesn't care if you live or die, and it has its own plans. And there is no knowing what may happen. And so as the magic hour had arrived, I had managed to force myself through will and excitement, fighting against depression and boredom, to remain on stand and hope that a deer would cross the creek. I had been listening all afternoon for the splashing of a deer crossing the creek to come out to the field. I was hoping that it would come through my thicket with the small clearing and let me get a nice close shot. Now I have my stand hung very low because I don't shoot out of a tree stand very often. And as an ethical hunter, I feel that I need to make sure that I can make a good shot. But it doesn't matter what you've got in your hand, because life ain't like the pornos, hunting ain't like the TV shows. And as the darkness came in, nothing had showed up, and this hunt came to a close. The moon had risen red the night before, and there was rain in the forecast, and it had started to rain about midnight. Trust me, I was awake, because very rarely do I sleep well before a morning hunt. And sitting in the phantasmagoria of the darkness, I plotted how this hunt might go. Because when we go into the woods as hunters, it is always a brand new adventure. Now you see, I was set up at the point of a cornfield where the deer might funnel down. I was set up in what I believed to be a really good spot because there was an antique tree stand hanging just above me. Now I was set up about 3 feet off the ground behind a multiflora rose patch that had grown up through a wood pile that was made when they cleared the field. There were oak trees behind me, and I had good cover to the front of me. The wind was in my face, and there was a chilly fog hanging in the air. Everything was so utterly, absolutely perfect. It was the kind of November morning that all Midwestern whitetail hunters dream about. I caught a glimpse of white across the cornfield, and it was the antlers of a mature buck. He had come in from the opposite direction that I had expected them to come from. I had expected them to be coming from behind me down into the field rather than in front of me. But luckily, the wind was absolutely perfect. And I realized at this point that as the buck made his way around the field, that there was a small button buck that was trailing a doe. And I got my bow at the ready, even though I knew that the likelihood of this working out was almost nothing. Because whitetail are wild and free, majestic creatures, and there's nothing that says that they have to do what you want. Of all the possible paths that they could take, the likelihood of them taking the one that I wanted to and giving me the shot that I was looking for was very small. And when I realized that this just might happen, my heart began to hammer in my ears. I was so utterly excited because I saw that this was definitely rutting activity, as these two bucks, a young buck and a mature buck, were trailing this doe, and she seemed to be leading them right where I wanted them to be. And so with my heart hammering in my ears, standing and ready for action, I forced myself to calm my nerves and calm my heart. Very excited, filled with primal emotion, because this simply can't be happening. There's no way that this doe is going to lead this buck right around the field, right in front of me, within 15 yards. And I could not believe my eyes when it began to transpire exactly as I had thought that it would. But with hunting, you never really know what may happen. And while I was excited at the prospect of being able to take this buck. The fact is that there is as much an element of wildlife photography as there is the actual act of hunting the animal. The wind was still in my face, and the deer were completely unaware of my presence. The doe in the front was getting very close, but all I needed was for the buck to step into view. But I had not counted on him stopping where he did, as the doe continued to walk. But the wind was in my face, and it was at this point that I realized that my camera on my bow had not had the memory card seated properly. And so I was caught like Wile E. Coyote when he falls off a cliff and realizes there's nothing but thin air beneath him, that while I tried to move my camera back, the buck looked right at me. Wasn't quite sure what I was, but my movement had spooked the doe, and she gave her alarm, and they had taken off across the field. But regardless of the fact of whether or not I did not get the shot, the fact was in my mind that I was so utterly fulfilled. For once I had been in the right place at the right time, and everything had gone according to plan until I had swung my camera arm too far and did not have a backup camera on my bow. But everything had been so perfect that that doe had gotten within 5 yards of me before she spooked at my movement of trying to swing my camera back. The buck had caught me with my hand on my camera arm rather than on my bowstring. And with no backup camera, it put me in a very precarious position. But I hunt for thrill of the chase. I'll just tell you right now, this hunt was a complete bust, because by the time that I was done working and got toward the woods, I met 5 deer on my way into the cornfield, and so there was nothing to be had. But the wind was going to be in my face in this spot, so I figured, well, maybe a buck might chase a doe down the hillside to me. Now, it had been several days since I'd been able to be in the woods, because I'd been working really hard to try and make enough money to get some more production upgrades to bring you guys more awesome, high-quality content. And, of course, for those of you that want to bitch and moan about me busting that buck the other day because I was screwing with my cameras and not shooting the buck because he wasn't on camera, first of all, the camera is God. If it ain't on camera, it didn't happen. Now, while I'm at it, if I didn't film my hunt, you guys would not be able to tell me what a terrible whitetail hunter I am. So this hunt came to a close after a very rough start and only about an hour's worth of daylight, but at least I was able to get into the woods. I didn't really expect lightning to strike twice, seeing as I had overslept, and it was just sunrise by the time that I got to my spot and got set up, and I'd pushed 3 does down the field ahead of me. Almost never do I ever get to hunt under ideal circumstances, because that's just not the way that my life works. But it was an absolutely beautiful November morning, the kind of November morning that all Midwestern whitetail hunters dream about, with the rut in full swing, the wind in my face, deer in the fields, and it was just above freezing. I watched several does on the opposite side of the gully that I was set up along, waiting, listening, and enduring the cold. And then movement caught my eye. A small buck had entered from the pasture side and began feeding in the cornfield. It always amazes me just how graceful the whitetail deer is. Now, it was a small fork-horned buck, nothing terribly impressive, but I admit I got mighty excited when I saw that he was coming my way. So I got myself into position. The wind was in my face and everything was perfect, and on the other side of the gully there were several deer. But right now my attention was all focused upon the fork-horned buck. Again, nothing impressive, but you can't eat the horns, and so they say that anything with a recurve is a trophy, as long as it's legal. Now, the tree and the multiflora rose shield me from view, and my heart was somewhat in my ears, but I knew that it was time to calm myself for action. There was one problem. Even though this young buck was within range and was clearly distracted, he simply was behind too much brush for me to feel good about taking the shot. And then he looked across the gully and he saw all those does. He was so close to me, but I could not get a shot no matter how hard I tried to get a proper angle on him. You see, whitetail are wild and free, majestic creatures, and there's no really knowing what they're going to do, and there's no really making them do anything other than what they want to do. But I had been so very close to another whitetail. The wind held in my face, and I was hopeful for a change because there were deer literally everywhere, and all it would have taken was for that buck to give me a broadside shot like he did, but for him to have taken 2 more steps for me to draw and fire an arrow with a perfectly clear shooting lane. I had honestly lost count of the amount of deer that were in the field across the gully. There were bucks chasing does, and then there were does that were not yet in estrus. Everything had such a beautiful orangish hue to it as the sun climbed higher and higher. My hands had gotten very cold while I was waiting on the buck. You see, I had honestly forgotten my winter gloves in my Jeep because I was running late on getting into the woods. And just as I was feeling sorry for myself that all the deer seemed to be out of range, here came a doe that had been pushed out of the other field by the bucks. She moved in front of me. I was tense as a coiled spring, but I could not draw my bow because she was looking in my direction, and so I had to wait until she was distracted. The multiflora rose had shielded me, but yet she just kept walking and was almost to the same spot that the buck had stopped, when without any warning at all, the wind hit the back of my neck, and it was over in the flash of a whitetail. While I would have happily taken the fork-horned buck as a gift from the gods of the hunt, I admit that I'm somewhat relieved that he didn't give me the shot, and I can watch him grow into a bigger buck, watching, waiting, listening, and enjoying the merry chase and the visceral mystery of the hunt. because things had almost gone completely right. I had been working on editing video late into the night after I had hung this stand, so by the time that I got into the woods, it was mid-morning, because you can't burn the candle at both ends for too long. But I hadn't busted out any deer on my way into the field, so I took that as a good sign that with the rut in full swing on this cold, frozen morning, that they might be on lockdown. Now, everybody loves to hunt the rut, but there is definitely a pressure to perform, because if you don't have any success in the rut, then the season gets incredibly more difficult, as if traditional bow hunting is ever an easy pursuit. Sitting, watching, waiting, I was rewarded for my patience for a change when a buck and a doe entered the field. They were far enough away that I didn't have to worry about my movement, and I continued my passion for wildlife photography. But I tell you what, there are few things more exciting than to watch a buck chasing a doe giving his tending grunts. One of the great things about traditional archery is that I have to watch the game. I spend most of my time, when I'm not seeing nothing at all, observing the animal's behavior and having to learn rather than waiting until they hit the bottom pin on my sight and firing off an arrow. I was watchful for more deer, because every time we go into the woods, it is always a brand new adventure. And another buck made itself apparent across the field, well out of range. The morning was still cold as the sun rose higher and higher. And then, out of nowhere, I looked up, and here was a fork-horn buck making his way around the field. Fiddling with my camera, and honestly not above taking a forkhorn at this point, another buck entered the field. Slightly older, but this was an uncharacteristic abundance of deer. It seemed that finally, after years, that I was in the right places at the right times. And so, I mentally prepared myself for action. When the temperature is below freezing, timing is everything. You want to have your bow at the ready, but you don't want to have your hands exposed for too long, because the cold is absolutely biting. He was only 30 yards away, and as he moved gracefully, I prayed that he would come closer. But my tree stand platform creaked, and I got his attention. I was far enough away that he still couldn't quite make me out. The wind had been in my face, and the older of the two bucks in the field had his attention caught by something else. And so, looking over him, I then saw an even more mature buck. An amazing day in the woods. You see, with traditional archery, you have to be close, and everything has to be absolutely perfect. And even if everything else goes right, nothing matters if nothing comes into range. So much of the challenge of bow hunting is about being at the right place at the right time, and while this hunt came to an empty end, I hunt for love of the chase. I'm going to get a little bit meta here and break the fourth wall. Right now I am putting the finishing touches on this day's video, and it's already tomorrow. Let me just tell you, it is not easy to get up, go out, sit for hours, and then go about real life, and then come home, edit, and try and tell you a compelling hunting story. But it's what I do, it's what I love, and for those of you that are wondering why I've gone to hunting out of tree stands now, it's because with winter on the way, the foliage is dying down and there isn't enough ground cover to hide me. So that's why I've been setting up tree stands at the spots that I've seen them come out. Now I've been mighty close, and I might get one. But even if I don't, that's just the way that hunting goes. Now, winter is coming up fast, and I'm not going to lie to you, I am not looking forward to another buckless December, because December is miserable for deer hunting. But I'm probably going to be there. No, I'm going to be there no matter what, because that's just the way that it's going to be. But it is easy to be optimistic when you are seeing deer. But it is not easy to be optimistic when it's mid-December, you're empty-handed, and your hands are about froze off. So here's hoping that I get lucky soon, because things seem to be lining up pretty alright, but with hunting, it's a visceral mystery, and you never really know. I didn't have high expectations for this hunt, but it was a drizzling rain and 33 degrees, and there was a beautiful desolation in the forest around the cornfield. The gully on my right side, the cornfield on my left side. While I didn't have high expectations for this hunt, because hunting is a visceral mystery, you never really know what may happen. However, you don't just go out and have a deer show up. I have spent years studying these animals and where they want to be, and even then, that's still no guarantee. Life is not like pornography, and hunting is not like TV shows, and I bring you the reality of hunting through my hunting stories as best that I can. Watching, waiting, listening, not expecting to see anything, and expecting to be disappointed, but yet my heart was racing as soon as I saw antlers coming through the gully. It was a buck, and he was about 100 yards away from me and feeding his way around the cornfield, completely oblivious to everything. And so I made myself ready should the moment of truth present itself. He moved so majestically like a lord of the forest, fidgeting with my camera, using my viewfinder as a spotting scope, watching him come and wondering, is this really going to happen? Because this seems absolutely perfect. Now there was one problem. While he came in exactly where I wanted him to be, he was right at 30 yards. He stood there feeding on corn cobs for a full 2 minutes broadside while I waited in suspense, hoping he would step closer into my kill zone. When a deer picks its head up, you don't realize just how much you move until you try and sit still as if your life depends upon it. With a compound bow, it would have been an easy shot. On film, he looks an awful lot closer than he actually was. 30 yards ain't how I do business. Sitting in the frigid rain, I realized that the gun seasons were coming up soon, and I have very little control over what these animals are going to do. Now, there is a level of pressure to perform because I film for YouTube, but I bring you the reality of bow hunting, the way that I bow hunt, and I am perfectly fine with having an empty season and a clear conscience. The wee folk of the woods vex me much, and they had played a great trick on me today. The slow descent into madness continues. I was doing a hang and hunt style adventure. I was at the foot of the ridge next to a little spring pool in a thicket alongside the cornfield corner. The wind was in my face. But with bow hunting, there's no guarantee that something is going to show up. Now, I had had a real good week up to this point, but with the shotgun season approaching fast, it was basically crunch time. And so I had decided that I was going to try and catch some midday deer movement. And under normal circumstances during the rut, after they've been on lockdown, midday is when you can expect bucks to be moving. So I expected that this was going to be crazy good, especially because I was in the perfect spot for it, where I had seen the bucks come into the field from this very spot. But with hunting, there is no guarantee, and deer, when it is ridiculously windy, simply don't move most of the time unless they're being pushed by other hunters. So sitting, watching, hearing the wind make ocean sounds in my ears, and trying not to get tree sick. If you've never been in a tree stand in a windstorm, then that's what tree sick is. It's basically like the equivalent of seasickness when you're in a tree. Now, as if there wasn't enough drama by the shotgun season approaching and me still not having a deer on the ground, I was informed by the landowner that I was going to be losing access to the property after this season, because he was going to start building a house on the property, which is fine, it's his land, but it added a whole new degree of desperation. So as the magic hour approached, after hours of sitting and fidgeting, I was wondering, was something going to show up? Now, naturally, I was facing the exact wrong way from what I needed to be facing. So I gingerly slid my camera arm around on the doe that had snuck up on me. Luckily, the wind was in my face, but this would have been a much better ambush had it been earlier in the season and the leaves had still been on the brush that I was hiding behind in my stand. The sun setting had flared off my camera when I swung it around and had spooked her. And so this hunt came to an end. And yet again, it appears that I'm going to become a nomadic hunter. After my last hunt in the darkness, I had moved my stand over to the opposite side of the teardrop of the field, where I had seen the doe come out. Setting up a stand in the darkness is an acquired skill, and it was my best guess as to where deer would be moving. It's like zeroing a rifle one click at a time. It was a frozen morning, and I admit that there was a lot of pressure, because not only were my days on this property numbered, but it was my last hunt before shotgun season would start. The wind was going to be in my face, it was well below freezing, and everything was almost perfect. Sitting, watching, waiting, listening. It was very calm, but there was just a wisp of wind in my face as a doe entered the field behind me. And then the antlers of a buck coming through the thick brush caught my eye, and I made myself ready. Now you see, I have always maintained that you can't make deer do something other than what they want to do. And so you have to figure out where they want to be, and where you can ambush them from. And if they aren't expecting you to be there, and they're acting their normal way, they will be practically oblivious. Now this buck hung around for about 2 full minutes behind that bush. And it's a good thing that the cover was so thick, because I was fidgeting with my camera. And it's strange, I admit, that I don't get buck fever, it seems, because normally I'm just so happy to see a deer. But when a deer is in range, this buck being only 15 yards from me in heavy cover that I couldn't sink an arrow through, it was time for business. Even though he was in range, I had simply picked the wrong tree to hang my stand on, and there was no way that I was going to be able to sink an arrow through that cover and feel good about it. But with hunting, you never really know. And it was so exciting to see a plan almost work out perfectly. Far off in the field, an even larger buck had hit that doe's trail and began to sniff around like a bloodhound until he finally hit the hot scent. The wind was still in my face, and there was no really knowing what might happen on this day. It had started out excellent, with the younger buck taking my trail but shearing off. I hunt, as I've said many times, for thrill of the chase. And you can't make deer do something other than what they want to do. And so, with my hours of the season ticking down, I decided that I was going to stay in the stand the entire day. Enduring the cold is also an acquired skill. Every type of hunting has its own different style of endurance. And the ability to sit in a stand and be miserable in a somewhat zen state of I will not quit is something that is very difficult to master. Waiting, listening, wondering, trying not to second guess myself, the squirrels on the dry leaves giving me a heart attack. Now you see, if you hear it, it is a squirrel. Because in my experience, deer are almost completely soundless and graceful and majestic when they move. Mid-afternoon rolled around after several hours of seeing nothing but squirrels, and there was a buck in the field behind me. I wasn't sure if this was the same buck. I was ready and waiting, and I was just happy that I was able to enjoy the visceral mystery of the hunt. Deer are wild and free, majestic creatures, and as I've said many times, there's no knowing what they're going to do. And then I looked behind me, and here was the buck coming right across the field. Everything was lining up to be just absolutely perfect. He was slightly out of range at this point, and the trees were covering him. Now you see, when you're in the right place at the right time, it seems like it would just be too easy with a compound bow. And as I looked across the valley, I saw another larger buck in front of me. I was literally surrounded by deer, and I thought, holy crap, I know life ain't like the pornos and hunting ain't like the TV shows, but this is shaping up pretty good. Now it was too cold for my can call to work properly, so I simply turned it over and blew in the bottom side. The buck was coming in after he crossed the fence, and he was only about 10 yards from me, and there was a little window that I could have sunk an arrow through. But I am a slave to my moral compass, Now, while I could have probably dropped the buck on the spot with an overhead spine shot between his shoulder blades, I decided that I was going to wait. My hands were screaming from the cold as I waited on the buck. The buck hung around behind the thick cover on the same trail that he had come in on this morning. Just in range, but just out of view. And then he broke cover. I had my cameras in the right position, my heart was in my ears, and I told myself, no. Now is the moment of truth. And as I raised my bow and drew, even though I barked at him, he simply continued walking. And by the time that I was at full draw, even though he had been only 15 yards away, he had gone out of view, and I wasn't going to send an arrow after him. The hunt is a visceral mystery, and there's no knowing what may happen on a hunt. I know that I should have drawn my bow and let fly as soon as the buck's head cleared his body, exposing his vitals. Self-filming a hunt adds a whole new degree of difficulty, but if I didn't film, I wouldn't be able to bring you the stories from my cyber campfire. So this is a really dumb idea. But due to my in-field intelligence that I have just gathered between this morning and this afternoon, I am going to attempt to move my stand to that tree right over there. At this point, I've got about 2 hours till sunset, and I've really got nothing to lose. So they seem to be crossing the fence over there, so that's where I'm gonna be. After sitting in the frozen darkness and the phantasmagoria, I was rewarded for my patience with a beautiful frost-fire sunrise. The wind was in my face, and everything was so utterly perfect as I watched the sun come up. There was a frost on the ground, and the leaves were brittle and crunched underfoot. It was the kind of morning that all Midwestern bow hunters dread, because it was my first hunt after the shotgun season had concluded. Because when the lead starts flying and the deer start dying, those that survive get smart and fast in a hurry. But it was so majestically peaceful, the air freezing, my mustache frosting ever so slightly, watching, waiting, listening, and wondering if the hunting pressure might have pushed deer onto my family's property. The cornfield was in front of me, and the creek was behind me, and I was only set up about 8 feet off the ground. If I saw something, I knew that it was going to be close. But I kept hearing a rustling behind me. I had heard something in the creek, and then I heard a crunch, 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 dainty steps on the leaves, and I turned my head, and I saw a buck, a small buck, but a buck nonetheless. And so I turned on my cameras as he walked down the fence row. He was shining because the water of the creek was freezing on his fur. I made my bow and my cameras ready, but I had not expected him to take this particular trail, and the irony was that this buck walked literally past a stand tree that I hadn't used in years. I grunted at him a couple of times as he moved toward the cornfield down the fence row, but he did not stop. He did not even give me a chance. He was completely oblivious, but he had walked within 20 yards of me. But when I realized that he was out in the cornfield, I was at least happy that one buck had survived the gun season, and I was also happy that my plan had almost worked out. But with hunting, you never really know, and it is a high-stakes game of whack-a-mole, and the slow descent into madness continues. You're probably noticing that things look a little different. I'm still in the same stand tree that I was, but after I knew that there wasn't going to be any activity, I decided instead of just sitting here that I'd go get my saw, cut some shooting lanes, and put a ladder on this tree so that I can elevate my stand a little bit more. So I've got all my lanes cut, I've got all my cameras mounted, everything's good to go. Now he came through here this morning, so we'll see if he comes back tonight. No idea. Not remotely a trophy buck, but at this point, I'd be very happy with it. Once I had gotten my stand complete, I took my rangefinder and I ranged all around me for reference points. The fence was only 20 yards away, so anything that came between me and the fence, if I could see it, it would be in range. I didn't really expect to see anything at all because I hadn't seen any deer movement in the field while I was working on my stand. But with hunting, you never really know. And I figured, what the hell? He came out this way in the morning. He might come back in the evening. Now luckily, the cold had somewhat abated during the noontime hours while I'd been working on this stand, but as the sunset approached, it came back with vengeance. The cold is its own enemy. The cold is your great adversary when it comes to hunting in the later seasons, because nothing will sap your resolve faster than the cold. And as a traditional bow hunter, it is incredibly important to keep your hands warm because you need to be able to feel your fingers. It's not as simple as pressing a trigger release. Watching, waiting, listening, having a heart attack every time that a squirrel would rustle the leaves. Believe it or not, it was a buck this morning. I had heard him behind me for several minutes, but I just thought that it was a squirrel. But that just goes to show you that anything is possible on a hunt in the magic hour of the morning. But it appeared that nothing was going to be happening in the magic hour of the evening. And as the cold darkness came down yet again, this hunt came to a close. But at least I had seen a deer after the gun season. I had checked my trail camera, and a few bucks had survived the gun season. This was the stand that I had hunted just before the gun season and moved at the last hours of the day. But unfortunately it appeared that all the deer movement had gone nocturnal, which is pretty traditional for what deer do after they've been shot at by bang sticks. But it was a rugged hillside covered in thorn trees, and I had in fact taken time and cut in a few shooting lanes. It was a warm fall evening, which was pleasant, but it also meant that deer movement was highly unlikely. The landowner was cutting up his field, preparing it for lying fallow over winter, working the corn stalks into the ground. And I didn't have high expectations for this hunt, but I was just happy to be in the woods yet again, experiencing the sacred and visceral mystery of the hunt, watching, waiting, listening, the cracking of twigs or the honking of geese exciting me. As the sun began to set, there was a beautiful rosy orange hue that was cast over everything. and the magic hour was approaching, and the air began to cool. And I knew if something was going to happen, it was going to need to happen soon. But with hunting, you never really know. Now there's a high likelihood that this will be yet another empty season. And I've made peace with that, because if I get a deer, I want to have earned it. Sometimes everything lines up just perfect, and I screw it up. Sometimes nothing lines up at all. With hunting, you never really know. And as I've said, after the first gun season, hunting gets even more difficult. And as the sun came down even further, I realized that the season was going to get even more difficult with the field being tilled under. While the sunrise is utterly beautiful and absolutely breathtaking, it does wash away the mystery and phantasmagoria of the darkness and leave us with cruel reality. Now, I have had several chances this season so far, and I really truly can't complain, because it's arguably been the best deer season of my bow hunting career. And people wonder why I don't gun hunt. And the answer is because, one, it's illegal to bow hunt during the gun seasons in Illinois. The other answer is the only deer that I killed with a shotgun, I killed within bow range. And I'm a bow hunter. It's what I do. It's the way that I'm wired, because I'm just kinky like that. I'm kinky in other ways too, but for the purposes of the discussion, I'm a bow hunting freak, and I do business the traditional way. So I can't really complain about not having chances, because part of why I went to traditional was because I almost never even saw a deer in my past seasons. And it doesn't matter how much your gear costs if nothing shows up. You could sit there with your phone in your hand and have as much chance some days of killing a deer as if you sat there with a fancy compound bow. But the rut was over. The first shotgun season was over, and according to my trail camera pictures, the deer had gone completely nocturnal. Now, some of the good bucks had survived, and some probably didn't. But all the pictures were after dark. And so this was a long day in the stand, because there's always that chance that something might show up during the daylight, because with hunting it is a visceral mystery and you never really know. But at the same time, you're always caught between a rock and a hard place, the hammer and the anvil, because you've got to have figured out where the deer are going to be at different stages during the season, because everybody loves to hunt the rut, because deer just get stupid in the rut. But when it comes to after the rut, that's when the real hard part starts. Now, it was an unseasonably warm day for the end of November, and so I wasn't hopeful. But as the sun sank lower and lower, I thought maybe, just maybe, they would come out of their beds and cross the fence line in front of my stand, watching, waiting, listening, and wondering, and reveling in the joy of failure, because I would rather go home empty-handed, having done my best according to my own moral compass, than simply have it handed to me where it wouldn't mean a damn thing. And so I am perfectly willing, as a traditional bow hunter, to have another empty season, knowing that I had done my best and that the game got away. My goal has never been, and is never going to be, that of bringing you the slaughter of majestic animals for the purposes of entertainment on high-definition media. It's just not the way I do business. It's not what I want to do. My goal is to bring you into the woods with me and tell you a hunting story at my cyber campfire that is Tex Grebner Outdoors. It was an unseasonably warm day for late November, and I was sitting in my Christmas tree blind up on the ridge above the cornfield, and I was wondering, where in the hell had they all gone? Because I was watching the cornfield literally all afternoon, and I had seen absolutely no movement. Not a thing. Occasionally a squirrel would rustle in the tall weeds or scramble up a tree trunk, but there was absolutely nothing. And I figured that it was most likely due to the fact that they'd been shot at by guns, it was warm, the rut was over, but I was wondering where on earth I might find them. I know that they exist. I know they are tucked away somewhere. But where in the hell could they be? The hunt is a visceral mystery. And I contemplated these things while I was sitting, watching, waiting, and listening to the wind blow through my ears, never knowing. But you see, it's been a really great season up to this point. The best season of my entire career, as I've said. And I've had chances, but you see, I don't want to do things the easy way. Now you could very well make a case, and it would be true, that I have self-worth issues, and that is why I make a point of doing things the hard way to try and achieve more validation. And that would be true. I'll own it. But as the sun sank lower and lower, against my better judgment, I got very, very excited as the birds flitted around my cowboy hat. The sun sank, the wind picked up, and the temperature dropped. The magic hour was upon me. And I thought sure that there would be a deer happening down my trail right in front of me on the way down to the cornfield. But it was not to be. So here I am. I just got done editing today's hunt. So after a long day of sitting, doing nothing, and seeing nothing, here I am on my spinning bike in my living room because, quite frankly, private land whitetail hunting is not particularly strenuous. But the best part of the season is over. The rut's done. I had some chances during the rut. Sometimes I was in the wrong place at the right time. Sometimes I probably should have shot, and I didn't. Other times I feel no shame about not shooting because I wasn't good with what I was seeing. But as I say, the hunt is a visceral mystery, and there's no knowing what may happen. And while I know that there is all likelihood of me having another empty season, while whitetail hunting is not necessarily an affair of endurance, the same way that sheep hunting or elk hunting can be, honestly, I take great pride in the fact that I am willing to go out when it gets Arctic cold outside. And so this season is in itself a bit of an act of endurance. Because while it was unseasonably warm this week, for the time of year that it is, I know that Old Man Winter is going to be dogging my heels soon enough. And it is in itself an act of endurance. Because when that cold starts to creep into your hands, it's unlike any other feeling. It's a primal terror. And I know that it's coming. And I know that I will be there. It's an act of endurance because I want to hunt as long as I possibly can. And no matter what, I will be there. And I have no problem going home empty-handed. Because we've got another gun season coming up here soon. And the rut's over. The best part of the season is done. It's over with. It is history. And I can't change that. All I can do is go out each day that I'm able and see if something happens. Because I don't know where the deer are going to be, and I don't know where they even are. They're basically nocturnal, and you can't make a wild and free animal do something other than what it wants to do. That's the honest-to-God, fair chase bow hunting truth. Trad life ain't just a hashtag. If you're about the trad life, then you got to be okay with the fact that you're going to have empty seasons. Again, most of the time, it doesn't matter what you've got in your hand, because if nothing shows up, nothing shows up. And I can't change that, and sure, I don't like going home empty-handed. But liking something and understanding it as a reality are two different things. Because winter, true winter, is going to be coming up. And by God, I'm going to be there. I have sat in a tree stand so damn long that I have literally had my own tears freeze on my cheeks because I was too stubborn to get down. And I have screamed into the wind. I've done it, and I've seen it, and I know what it is. But the sad thing is, at this point, with the rut being done, what it's really going to take is that bitter, god-awful cold of a Midwestern winter to bring those deer out from wherever they're hiding and force them to move. While whitetail hunting is not a strenuous endeavor, I feel that it is a little bit of an act of endurance to see just how far into the god-awful ass end of winter that I am willing to take my hunts. Because that's just the way that it goes. That's all there is to it. Winter is coming, and I will be there. Because that's the way that it's going to be. Sure, I would have loved to have killed a deer opening day. I would have loved to have got that nice buck that was right in front of my tree stand a couple of weeks ago. But he was further than I wanted to shoot at him, and I would rather never shoot than sling a bad arrow. That's just the way that I do business. That's just the way that I operate. And I'm not saying that it's not possible that I might take or make a bad shot. Because that's just the way that it goes sometimes. There's things that are beyond your control. But I don't intend on compromising my moral compass or my ethics or the way that I want to go about things for anybody or for any reason. But winter's coming, and who knows, maybe by the time Christmas rolls around I might get one on the ground. But if I don't, I know you guys will let me hear about it, and you'll be madder than hell about all the deer that I didn't shoot earlier in the season. But guess what? I didn't. You might be bored as hell watching it, but guess what? I'm bored as hell living it. But that's just the way that hunting works. That's the way that it goes. And truthfully, I don't care, because if it were easy, it wouldn't mean anything. I know that I could have killed that buck at 30 yards with a compound, just put my pin on his heart and done it. But he wasn't close enough. I want an intimacy with nature that only comes with getting close. Life is a violent, beautiful, visceral mystery. And I intend on living it. So with winter coming on soon, and the cold coming soon, I'm not necessarily looking forward to ending the season empty. And I'm not necessarily looking forward to sitting in a tree watching my breath freeze my fletching solid. But I know that I'm going to be there, because that's the way that it works, and I take great pride in hunting when other guys just won't go out. And I'm not going to lie to you, it's not easy to be motivated to go out and sit and not see shit. It's not easy. But I'm gonna, and it's gonna happen, and I'm gonna see a lot of awful pretty stuff, and the wood fairies will continue to vex me, because the hunt is a sacred and visceral mystery, and there's no knowing what may happen on a hunt. All types of hunting have their own levels of endurance. It just happens that whitetail hunting is not a sexy kind of endurance. But that's why here I am, just got done editing today's hunt. Here I am on the spinning bike in the living room, looking at a camera, basically talking to myself. The slow descent into madness continues. After sitting in the frozen phantasmagoria of the darkness, I was rewarded with an absolutely beautiful frost-fire dawn. The wind was blowing across me, and the gun season had yet again concluded. I hadn't had any activity on any of my trail cameras during the gun season, and so with no idea where the deer might be, I decided to strike off into the unknown. And I decided that I was going to push my luck and set up on the backside of the property. I was sitting in the shadow of a tree that still had some leaves, and I was about 10 yards off of a deer trail that was deeply cut through a wild rose thicket. There is a terrible beauty and desolation to the woods in winter, because it is cold. Now when you're sitting in the shadow of a tree, it will hide your silhouette much more effectively. But no matter how high the sun gets, because you are sitting in the shadow, you don't get any warmer. But here I was, watching, waiting, listening, and wondering if today might be the day. Now you see, hunting is a visceral mystery. Visceral means your guts. It is a gut feeling. So a visceral mystery is something that you can't really explain, but you understand deep inside. And there is a beautiful desolation to hunting in the later seasons. Truthfully, it is human will to sit and watch and wait, knowing you're probably not going to see anything, matching your will against the terrible beauty of the cold and the elements that literally do not give a damn. It was bitchin' cold, and there were ice crystals floating in the air like fairy lights, but it was desolate in its beauty. But this hunt got off to a very rough start because I overslept, and so I got to the woods at the cusp of dawn. It was so damn cold, but I knew that and I was mentally prepared for that. But nothing really mentally prepares you for the lack of dexterity in your hands when they get that cold. Now, I did have heavy gloves on, but I didn't want to take a chance at my lack of dexterity in the gloves making me drop one of my cameras out of the stand when I went to screw on the mics and then screw my cameras into my mounts. So I took off my heavy winter gloves, at which point then I go and I put in a chew after I pull up my bow, and I pull out one of my arrows and I go and put it on the string. The trouble is, I just had my fingers, which were bare, in my mouth, putting in my chew. So the moisture froze my fingers to the arrow shaft, which is bare aluminum where I had gripped it. So it didn't want to come away. So when I pulled, when the frozen condensation broke, it made my arrow go twanging about 5 feet from my stand like a half-assed shot. But I figured, well, I've got extra arrows. It was at that point that I put on my archery glove, grabbed another arrow, and because of my extra layers of clothing, I decided I need to take a couple of practice draws so that I make sure that I know how I can find my anchor point if a deer actually shows up. Well, you see, at that point, I had gripped my arrow a little too hard, and I had accidentally activated my Nocturnal nock. So I pull out my pocket knife, go to deactivate my Nocturnal nock, and because of my lack of dexterity, because I had hardly even taken time to warm up my hands, I just pop my nock right out the back of my arrow, and it goes flying. Now, I've only got one arrow left up in the stand with me, and we're just literally at the cusp of dawn. So, now I get down out of the stand, grab my nock, grab my arrow, and I'm literally turned around. The sun's just starting to peek up, and by God, the wee folk vexed me much, because they sent 2 does right up to me, and I'm on the ground, no bow, no way to turn on my cameras, and no way to get back into my stand without spooking these 2 does that came up the frozen creek. So, with all that being said, it was a pretty exciting hunt, and it was so beautiful, and it was so brutal in the coldness. Even though I knew that I wasn't going to see anything at all after that point, I still figured with hunting, you never really know. So I climbed back up into my stand and endured. I had set this stand on the opposite side of the creek in the darkness. I was at the foot of the ridge, and I had a deer trail going up the ridge on my left side in perfect position for an excellent ambush shot. The creek was in front of me, and I had decided that I was going to start hunting this side of the creek so that I would not push the deer out on my way in. Watching, waiting, listening, I was rewarded for my patience when I saw a deer moving along the creek, well out of range and not heading in my direction, but I was just thrilled that I had at least seen a deer, to know that they still existed. Waiting and listening to the creek start to freeze solid. Everything was so beautiful in its elemental brutality. Now, I love hunting on snow because everything is truly beautiful. And the beauty of the snow makes it worth the bastard level of cold. But when everything is dormant limbs and frosted tundra ground, it isn't nearly as fun as hunting on snow. But I admit, when I know that there are going to be unfavorable conditions, I get very excited about hunting because there's a certain element of bragging rights that goes into it. If I know that it's going to be rainy or I know that it's going to be cold, I get excited because once you get comfortable with the fact that you're not going to be comfortable, it makes you fearless in the face of the suck. Okay, old man winter, come at me, bro. I saw a coyote moving along the tilled under corn rows on the opposite side of the creek out in the tilled field. It was the first time that I had ever actually seen a coyote moving in daylight, and it excited me very much. Most of the year, most of the season, we have squirrels as the bane of our existence. But when the woods are nothing but frosted tundra ground and dormant trees, it's good to have a squirrel as a distraction because you peer through the limbs and look around, scanning for any sign of life in the moonscape of a frozen wood. No knowing what may happen on a hunt, but at this point, with the fields turned under and the rut over, I'm going to need a really dumb deer or some really good blind luck. Here I am, set up, same spot as this morning for my last hunt before the muzzleloader season starts. And I don't have high hopes, which is why I'm actually taking time to yak at you in my stand. You see, in the late season, deer will frequent food sources. The problem is the food sources that they will be frequenting are probably not on the property that you have access to. That's just the sad truth. I hate it, but it's true. And I've never had a food plot turn up the way that it looks on the bag. That is as unrealistic as expecting a McDonald's double cheeseburger to look the way that it does on the menu after you open up the package. It just don't happen because anything that would grow a food plot is already developed in row crop agriculture. And the places that aren't developed because they are too inhospitable to farm, fertilize, and grow. Trust me, I know that if I had a 1/4 acre right down here in that clearing of turnips and frigid forage, dude, I'd be set. You see, in Illinois, you're not allowed to bait. And there's some scientific reasons and some spirit of the law ethical reasons why you're not allowed to bait. I can sit over a cornfield, but I can't actively put corn out with the purpose of hunting deer over it. Speaking of the cornfield is now tilled under. The rut is over. It hasn't snowed yet, but it's bitchin' cold. So, yeah, sure, I know that deer can be easily hunted over food sources. The problem is, I live in real life, where I don't have properties
that have the late season food sources. So all I can hope to do is catch wandering deer. Now what we really need is some snow. We need some snow to freak them out and make them forage real hard. Whether or not that's going to happen anytime soon, I don't honestly know. But that's where the season is right now. If I had food plots that would grow, I might be set. But that ain't the case. So I'm just going to sit here and enjoy the terrible beauty of this little cattle pasture at the beginning of winter. And maybe I'll get something. Maybe I won't. But regardless, I'm going to tell you a hunting story. Because life ain't like the pornos, and hunting ain't like the TV shows. I am way too far down this rabbit hole to go about changing. Because if I went back to gun hunting for whitetail, it wouldn't feel quite right. Because I would still want to be close, within bow range, even though I was hunting with a shotgun. And if I went to a compound bow, it still wouldn't feel quite right, because not only would I have to hear about it from everybody else, but I would feel like I gave up and that I quit. You can make me crawl, you can make me cry, you can kill me, but you will not separate me from my will. You cannot make me quit. And there's many reasons to hunt, and it's not up to me to tell you your morality. But amongst all the other reasons that I hunt for thrill of the chase. And it doesn't matter what you've got in your hand if nothing shows up, as I've said many times. Hunting is a high-stakes game of whack-a-mole, being in the right place at the right time. And there's so many variables outside of your control that it is truly, as I have said, a visceral mystery. But it's difficult not to have self-loathing introspection when you spend as much time alone in the woods as I do. Because the great irony is, most of us spend a great portion of the rest of the year plotting, hoping, scheming, wishing, and dreaming, trying to figure out how to make this season better than the last season. But then, when the season rolls around, the gods of the hunt have their own sport and foil our plans at every turn and show us that what we thought we knew was wrong, or give us almost what we want, but keep it just out of reach, or in the case of the traditional archery, just out of range. And it's interesting that this point in the season, I find myself mechanically hunting and yet planning for next season, next year. But every time we go into the woods as hunters, it is a brand new adventure, and there's no knowing what may happen on a hunt. Story of my life. Buck's on the wrong side of the property line, 20 yards away, just looking at me. This hunt started out far from perfect. It was early afternoon, and I made my way in across the cornfield toward the rose patch in the backside of the property. But on my way across the cornfield, I counted 6 flagging whitetails headed up the ridge before me.
Because you see, after the gun season, deer get really skittish. And so, I didn't have high hopes for this adventure, but with hunting, you never really know. And so I decided that I was going to set up in the rose patch behind the property and wait out the afternoon just to see what might happen. The wind was blowing across me, which was good. And with the fields turned under and the rut over, I didn't really know what might be going on, so I figured I'd just have to see. Everything was desolate in its terrible beauty, with the teeth of the cold, but yet gentle wind gnawing at my face. But anything is possible in the magic hour. And then he was there, like a ghost. He made no sound whatsoever. I had simply felt him, turned my head, and thought, holy shit, there's a deer right there. He's inside of 20 yards and doesn't know that I'm here. I managed to get my cameras on and swing my camera while he was with his head down. But he was facing me, and it was not the shot that I was looking for. And then, when I turned my head back, he simply took off. Now it is amazing to me how you can be so cold and then instantly, when the adrenaline hits you, when a game animal comes into view, you instantly forget all about the cold when it's time for action. Now, there are things that I probably could have done differently, because if I had simply sat completely still, he would have probably just walked down the trail toward me and then given me a broadside shot at about 5 yards. But with hunting, it's always a brand new adventure. And I hunt for thrill of the chase. I could not have counted on having an encounter that was so good on a day that started out so bad. Now, while I would have nothing to pack out, my soul was at least fulfilled because I had engaged in the visceral mystery of the hunt. And I had gotten so very close to a good-sized buck that had lived through the gun seasons. The night before, I had hung a stand back in the neighbor's property. After dark, of course, because that's when I actually had time to do it. And packing in a stand, cutting shooting lanes, and hanging a stand along with setting camera mounts by headlamp is an acquired skill that I have, that I've mentioned many times. Now, the reason that I needed to hang a stand in there was because previously I had removed all my stands from that property because I didn't want to be fighting the winter snow, because I knew that it was my last year of hunting that particular property. But after my close encounter with the buck, I decided that I needed to get back off the ground, and maybe he might come back. But this morning I wasn't hunting that property. I was hunting the cattle pasture, because I figured that after a night's work that spot would need some time to breathe. I was, however, disappointed when I realized after checking my trail camera that there had been absolutely no deer activity pass in front of it. But life ain't like the pornos, and hunting ain't like the TV shows. And you never really know what's going to happen on a hunt until you've been there and you've done it. Now, I will be completely honest with you. While I would love to get a deer, the fact is, I love the chase just as much. And even though I might come out empty-handed, I really truly love that heart-thumping adrenaline high of predatory clarity that comes with getting close to a whitetail. Even if I come out empty-handed, getting the thrill without the mess is almost just as good. Not quite just as good as having a buck on the ground, meat in the freezer, and bragging rights. But I never mind if the game outsmarts me. It's what they do. At this point in the season, the cattle pasture is basically dead. I can't see myself getting a deer out of there at all because there's no activity whatsoever on the trail camera. So I'm basically going to have to go into their inner sanctum and invade their personal range and hope that that buck comes back. But I bet that I gave that buck the scare of his whole damn life, because that buck didn't get that size by accident. He did not live through that many gun seasons and that many bow seasons by being stupid. So I figure that I won the high stakes game of whack-a-mole for a change, because I was in the right place at the right time and I just screwed it up. But if you can do it better on film with a traditional bow, you send me a link and I'll be happy to give that video a thumbs up. Anyhow, this is another thing that you're either going to get or you ain't going to have the capacity to comprehend. With fair chase hunting, it doesn't bother me when the animal gets away, because I get such a high from being there and being that close to an animal. Nature is cruel, and that animal only got that big and that old living by its wits. And when I can be that close, I won't claim that it's as good as getting that deer, but those little heart-racing snippets of adrenaline really make it worth it. And I'm back with another inner monologue. It always seems like by this point in the season, when things are winding down and you've watched the deer for the better part of a year, that you finally got them figured out. But you got them figured out just too late. So I'm not all that hopeful for the rest of the season, but with hunting, you never really know. I'm also not very hopeful for any activity in the cattle pasture, barring some blind luck. And there's an awful lot of things on the other property that I'm losing access to that I wish that I would have done differently earlier in the season. But on this side of it, it's too late to do anything about it. I can't change it. I gotta live with it. Probably not gonna see anything at all tonight, but I'm still going out. Pretty cold, so that's always a good sign. As you can see, I've got my jacket over my pack. This is a lesson that I had to learn the hard way, because with all this camera gear, weight adds up fast. And honestly, most backpacking technical clothing from other hunting companies isn't heavy enough for whitetail in the later seasons. Now, that's not really their fault. What I'm getting at is, it does not take much movement at all to be overdressed when you're actually carrying a pack. So obviously, as you see, I've got my jacket over my pack as I'm coming in. Walk in cold, because it won't take long before you get nice and warmed up when you're hauling a pack. So walk in cold, then put your layer on when you stand still. It's a hard lesson that I had to learn. But hopefully, while this is obvious to all you Western guys, it's not so obvious east of the Mississippi. I was hunting the stand that I had set the night before this afternoon. Everything about this spot was so perfect. There were oak trees, there was a rub line to my right, and there was the wild rose trail on my left, and directly in front of me there was a grass thicket in between patches of timber. But I had not penetrated so far into this part of the property for fear of driving deer off the property, and I finally found myself hunting where I should have started hunting near the beginning of the season, when pushed there myself by desperation. But yet I had had a very close encounter that I could have capitalized on had I been in this very spot, up in this very tree, just days ago. But you see, I do not regret shots that I have not taken. I simply have regrets about spots that I have not sat. Because this far into the season, it is easy to look back, examine in retrospect all the things that could have gone right and didn't, and all the things that I should have done and I didn't. But for the time being, everything was so utterly peaceful as the magic hour ticked by toward darkness. And so I waited, watching, waiting, listening, and engaging in the visceral mystery of the hunt, because there's no knowing what may happen. It is something that we feel deep inside, but yet we cannot hope to fully comprehend. The darkness came down faster, and the temperature continued to drop. My evolution as a bow hunter goes something like this. I never had a bow hunting mentor or anybody to really show me the ropes, so to speak. Now, I did have several people when I first got into archery teach me an awful lot about the way that compound bows worked and how to sight in and so on and so forth. But when it came to bow hunting, I was basically on my own. So if you wonder why I'm such a, quote, terrible bow hunter, it's because I never had a teacher. I'm all self-taught. And so my evolution as a bow hunter goes from being all wrapped up around the axle about fancy gear and a ripping fast bow and super bright 5-pin fiber optic sights and a drop-away rest, which is all funny because I always use nothing but a $10 Walmart Allen Company trigger release. But I had pins from 20 all the way out to 50 yards. But because I was all into the new fancy whiz-bang gear every year, I could not afford, being an independent outdoorsman, to actually upgrade every year. It just got too expensive getting the new sight, the new rest, trying to get a new bow. And so I eventually decided that I couldn't keep up. And with traditional archery, it is already obsolete, so it's never out of style. And I went from hoping that a deer would come within range of my 50-yard pin to the only range that I cared about was wanting to be so close to the animal that I could not possibly miss its vitals. It's kind of funny like that, how when I had a 5-pin sight, it doesn't matter what you've got in your hand if nothing shows up. The only range that I care about is being close enough that I can't possibly miss. And through that, it went from how far can I shoot to how close can I get a much more primal and intimate experience with nature. And it has taught me patience, and it has taught me humility. And it has taught me that hard work is the only way for potential success. I say potential success because nature simply does not care. I don't know if I could go so far as to call what I'm doing bow hunting anymore at this point in the season. Tree stand meditation, maybe? I'm not really sure. The best part of the season is over, and so it basically amounts to tree watching, occasionally bird watching, or squirrel watching with a bow and arrow. I highly doubt, after what I have seen, that the deer actually winter on this property. But with hunting, it is a visceral mystery, and you never really know. So I decided that I was going to go out because the wind was right. And the wind is half the battle. The irony of hunting is, even if you do everything right, there's still no guarantee that anything at all is going to show up. And so, bow hunting in the later seasons ends up amounting to nature watching, introspection, and tree stand meditation, plotting and scheming for the next year, and questioning what you've done right and what you've done wrong. And it reminds you to be humble in the grand scheme of things, because there is such a terrible beauty to nature, because it simply does not care. It is going to do what it is going to do. And that is why hunting and religion are inexplicably linked, because when you literally had to live off of the land, there was a religious worship to it, because you needed to please the gods of the woods. You needed to please the gods of the wild. You needed to please the deity of the hunt, because your life and your family's life depend upon you. It was a strange day. 40 degrees in the middle of December. More like October weather, to be honest. I didn't know what I might find when I got to my stand, and with hunting you never really know. But I had a choice. I didn't have high hopes, and so the choice was, do I chalk up the season or do I go out and hunt? And I assure you that I will be here until the last dog is hung. Whether I see anything or not, it is always good to commune with nature and take time to be quiet and watch and wait and listen, because the hunting season is such a very special time. While bow season in Illinois is long, it only comes once a year. On this hunt, I saw no deer to speak of. I heard no deer to speak of. And it's funny how, and I've said this before, you can go from hating the squirrels in the early season for giving you a heart attack to hoping to see a squirrel or any sign of life to entertain yourself. However, I was blessed with the sight of a bald eagle flying over my stand, and I won't go so far as to say that it made it worth it, but any sign of life is a good sign in a tree stand December. The creek had gone from frozen to bubbling yet again, and it created sort of a lullaby as the sun sank lower and lower and this hunt came to a close.
Optimism can't change facts. And while you never know what may happen on a hunt, I've got a real good hunch that this is going to be yet another empty hunt. So what this is going to amount to is I'm going to sit here and I'm going to watch the sun go down and work toward a oneness with nature.
The landowner's tractor was softly droning in the field across the woods. He was disking up the corn stalks for the second time of the year to make sure that everything was ready for the spring planting. So far, it had been a very gentle winter, and we had actually had no snow. When I got in, it was just above freezing, which for this time of year is pleasant weather. The wind was completely wrong, but I didn't have a choice. This was the spot that I thought I had the best chances in, and yet with the wind completely wrong and my chances so slim, I didn't see it doing any hurt because there probably wasn't going to be any action. Hope is the lie that we tell ourselves in order to keep going. And so with a sliver of hope in my heart, I sat and watched and waited for dusk, knowing that it probably wasn't going to happen, but yet wanting to be here just in case it did. There's a lot that goes through my mind when I am sitting, a lot that I think about, and I hate to say that I was planning the next season before this season was over, but it's true. I knew that I wasn't going to see anything, and I was simply sitting in the woods with a weapon, in a tree stand meditation, wondering what I could do differently for the next year. But there was that sliver of hope as the air became even more chilly and the sun sank lowest and the darkness came on fast, that maybe, just maybe, a deer might happen into range. But optimism does not change facts. After you get done with your real life responsibilities and you've got maybe 2 hours worth of daylight left, do you go hunting? Or do you go home and think about what you could do different next year and just call it a season? Well, the honest answer is, as you can tell, I went home, suited up, came out, and got about the business of not seeing nothing and doing a whole lot of nothing but being in nature. It was a pleasant day in the stand, what little time that I got to spend. And you never know what's going to happen on a hunt, even if your better judgment says you ain't going to see shit. But I bring you along with me because I made you a promise that I would bring you the reality of bow hunting the way that I bow hunt. Some days are good, some days are miserable, and I confess that I do struggle with boredom. So thank God for those wretched squirrels that are constantly giving you a heart attack when they rustle the leaves and play with your hopes until all of a sudden you figure out, damn it, it's a squirrel. But it doesn't stop you. Hunting in the later seasons is a pure act of will, because you know you're probably not going to see anything. But through willpower alone and a desire to hunt as many days as you possibly can, you still go out and you still go hunting. and make the best of what you got.
At this point, I don't know what I can actually tell you. I bring you the reality of bow hunting the way that I bow hunt. The season is winding down, and there's not a damn thing that I can do about it. I have to live with the choices that I have made, and honestly, truthfully, I have no regrets. There are things that could have went better, but by far this is the most successful season of my entire on-film career as a bow hunter.
It had snowed since I had been able to go out hunting, and so I was excited because I love hunting on the snow. One, it gives you a chance to see a record of where the animals have been moving. Two, it is so utterly beautiful, but in a terrible way. Three, as long as it is fresh snow and hasn't crusted over, you can move through the woods like a ghost to get where you want to be. It forces deer to actually be active during the daylight and forage. And so it seems to at least improve your chances, or at the very least, it makes it so that when deer are moving around, you can see them at greater distances because the white blanket on the ground makes them really pop out for your eye. But I love hunting in the later season because of the snow, but I also hate hunting in the later seasons because it means that I haven't gotten anything yet. But I will be here until the last dog is hung. But hunting in the later seasons, as I've said many times, is an act of endurance and willpower. Because when you are sitting in the terribly beautiful desolation of a frozen landscape, it makes you feel very small and insignificant. Because we humans, we're not terribly durable, we're not very strong. And our only reason for survival is through our intellect and being able to create clothing that will help us endure the elements. You see, do not remove your gloves when you are actually out in the elements. Sitting there for hour upon hour, sitting still, watching, listening to the silence, and wondering if tonight would be the night, I was musing on the fact that I am simply one insignificant creature in God's cruel kingdom, because the elements, they simply do not care. Nothing arrived tonight, but I was glad that I had hunted. At the beginning of archery season, it doesn't really suck because you're coming fresh off of summer, the weather is still pleasant. It might rain, which can be uncomfortable, but it's not agonizingly cold and miserable. But importantly, what I'm getting at is, at the beginning of the season, it seems much easier to hit what you're aiming at. But as the season goes on and you spend more time in the woods hunting and less time shooting, and throw into that the fact that the weather forces you to wear gloves so that you don't frostbite your fingers, that complicates things, and it leaves me wondering as I sit watching, waiting, and listening to the savage silence around me, if a deer actually did show up, would I even still be able to make an accurate killing shot? This is something that nags at me so badly in the later seasons of, if something showed up, could I even hit it? Now obviously I'm a pretty good shot, but at the same time, I want the animal where I literally can't miss. Luckily, this hunt was empty, and I was spared finding out the answer to that question. I have never before hunted so far into a whitetail season, but because I remain empty-handed, I still go out by force of will, force of habit, and the simple fact that I have nothing better to do with my time than see how far into the season that I can hunt. Now, while there are telling tracks in the snow of deer activity, hunting is a visceral mystery, and it remains a high-stakes game of whack-a-mole. There is no logical reason that would possess a deer simply because I am sitting in my stand to walk within range of me. And so I go out on the illogical hope of whitetail perhaps being foolish enough to happen within range of me. During the rut, if you find the does, you find the bucks. During the early season, there is no real knowing where the deer might be because food is absolutely everywhere. But after the rut, the deer are driven by their need to feed for warmth. Now, with the fields turned under, there is no guarantee that the deer will be traveling through the properties that you have access to. The snow stung my face as it accumulated on the brim of my hat, and my hands ached inside the muff despite the gloves. The sun sank lower and lower as the snow continued to fall in the beautiful, silent savagery of nature, and elements that, as I have said, simply do not care. But still I remained, watching, waiting, listening, until the very last of my shooting light. I'm not going to lie to you. At this point, I about had the season written off as a failure, and I was ready to hang it up. But I got done with my real-life responsibilities with enough daylight to head to the timber. So all day I'd been thinking about concocting this Wile E. Coyote style scheme of, well, I was going to take my Montana decoys out, and I was going to stick them in the field in front of me. I was going to set up alongside the cornfield, and I was going to hope that deer might think, well, ding, 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 here's the dinner bell. There's deer over there. Let's go check it out. So, guess what? It was snowing again, and it was cold as a bastard. But here I was, sitting in the fence row, watching, waiting, and listening, and being as still as I possibly could. And then, naturally, the high-stakes game of whack-a-mole goes on. My first sight of deer, and she had come right down the hill face where I have sat in the past, and I had simply guessed the wrong trail. But while I was ready to completely write off the season, I suppose the visceral mystery goes on, and I might just keep hunting. So you better stay tuned. I was hunting on the ground, and I was set up on the ground because there were no trees within range of the trail that would actually support a stand that weren't honey locust and covered in 3 to 6 inch thorns.
Hunting on the ground with a recurve naturally is difficult because you're pretty much on eye level with your game. Hunting on film on the ground with a recurve becomes even more difficult. However, with that being said, I'm here to bring you my archery season, and I value what I do the way that I do it much more than simply putting meat in the freezer. What on earth do you, the viewer, gain if I simply hunted on my own, for myself, never brought the camera into the woods with me? At that point, you would not even be able to complain that I never killed anything, simply because you wouldn't even be able to see it. Now, I was set up alongside of the trail that the doe had come down the night before, and I wasn't particularly hopeful, but as the sun sank lower and lower, I remained vigilant, keeping my bow in my hand, and hoping that I would be able to get a shot if she came back down the ridge this evening. I was secreted away on the fence line with my outline broken up behind me, my mustache frosting in the frigid air. It was hovering just around zero. But as the light came to the end, I saw that the does had simply taken another trail down into the field, and the high-stakes game of whack-a-mole goes on. When I had packed up my gear the night before with numbed fingers in the sub-zero temperatures, I actually had broken one of my remotes. So I was having to operate one camera manually to turn it on and turn it off. So that complicated things. Now, there's a lot that goes on that you don't actually get to see that goes into filming an episode. But I'll say this, the idea of simply going out, just my bow and me, climbing up into a deer stand or sitting on a camp stool, just my bow and me, it just seems so blessedly simple. And I hate to say it, but that ain't what I'm into. I'm into bringing you along, bringing you to my cyber campfire, and telling you a hunting story. Time is a meaningless concept in hell. So it doesn't matter how long you have to sit. When it is sub-zero temperatures, there's nothing that's going to make it any better. And I'll be honest with you, when you spit and it turns into a frozen tear before it hits the snow, it's damn cold. The good news is, when it is that cold, the whitetail have to move, because it is just too damn cold for them to sit still. And so, out of a 50-50 chance of deer coming in front of me or coming behind me, I happened to be facing the wrong damn way. And so, as the sun sank lower and lower, 3 does came down the ridge behind me as the moon rose. With my cameras off, no way to turn and shoot, I heard a doe blow in my ear no more than 3 yards away as she had come down the ridge to jump the fence into the cornfield to paw at the snow. And then all hell broke loose. And that was the end of it. But I still remained vigilant that deer might just happen in front of me until the very last of light. At this point, it's not about going out and having fun. It has turned into a bit of vendetta. It was -10 when I shut off my Jeep and hiked in. Deer are wild and free, majestic creatures, and the hunt is a visceral mystery.
And there's no making a deer do something other than what it already wants to do. But I knew that I was going to see deer. They might not be close enough for me to get a shot at, but I knew that with it being negative 10 degrees outside, they would have no choice but to move during the daylight. And so I examined the tracks in the snow that were well within range of me, watching, waiting, and listening until movement across the field drew my eye, and I had my bow at the ready. A doe was coming in. Instantly, primal excitement took hold in me, and the cold was gone from my mind, gone from my aching fingers as my adrenalized state continued, and I marveled at her beauty and majesticness until, for no apparent reason, she simply pranced away down the field. She had never remotely come within range of me, but I was so very happy that my patience had finally been rewarded to where I could at least justify the fact that I was out here, my mustache frosting over. However, there's no knowing what may happen on a hunt, and as the moon rose and the shooting light faded, I kept my bow in my hand, my fingers aching, hoping against hope that more deer might pass my secreted hiding spot. I was looking for a side-on ambush, but it was not to be. The point of sitting in this very spot over and over again was the fact that I was well brushed in from behind me, and I was brushed in on the front side of me for the most part. That way, if deer came around the corner of the field following the route, then they would be in my kill zone at a very close range before they would notice me. The tracks in the snow told me that this was a good plan. However, deer are wild and free, majestic creatures, and there is no knowing what may happen on a hunt. And so despite the fact that all my infield intelligence told me that there was a good solid chance that deer might be happening past my hiding spot, I looked across the field and saw that I had lost the high-stakes game of whack-a-mole. You see, far across the field, in another field, here were the deer pawing at the snow as the sun sank lower and lower and the moon slowly began to rise. But I remained hopeful that with these deer out and about, that deer might be coming down the ridge behind me, and that they might make their way in front of me because of all the tracks that I had seen directly in front of this spot. However, this was not to be, because 4 more deer came out of another part of the field and made their way over to join their fellows. Life ain't like the pornos, hunting ain't like the TV shows, and deer are wild and free, majestic creatures, and hunting is a visceral mystery. So, I had sat, I had waited, I had watched, and I had listened to the birds rattling in the dead limbs above my head until the very last of light. I'm not going to lie to you. At this point in the season, it's not about having fun. It has degenerated into vendetta. It is my seppuku at the altar of nature. I will let the elements kill me if they can, and I will break myself against the wild before I give up. About the time that you think that you have things figured out, nature, which simply does not care, will laugh at you and foil your plans. So, I got into the woods early as I possibly could after my real-life obligations, and I set up right alongside where I had seen the deer frolicking the night before. From about noon on to dark, I sat, I watched, I waited, I listened, and I endured the frigid, bitter January weather of a Midwest whitetail winter. And I saw absolutely nothing. But at least I went out hunting, and that's all that matters.
We're fixing to get wild.
I was surprised to see that the bucks were still holding their antlers, but I was very disappointed to see that the deer had started moving very early in the day. This buck was across the field, far, far out of range, but yet right in front of my blind. He had gotten there before I got there, and so I decided that I would see if anything else came out to the field. But I watched and waited until he made his way back up into the timber, where I could safely secret myself away in my blind. Yet again, the wind was right. It was bitterly cold. And while I was disappointed that he had been there before I was there, I was just very thrilled with the fact that I had seen a deer. And I was surprised, I must confess, that with the bitter cold the bucks were still holding their antlers. But you never know what may happen on a hunt. And despite the cold, despite the winter depression, and despite the fact that deer season was ticking down, I made up my mind that yet again I would sit till dark. I hunt not for the meat. I hunt purely for sport and thrill of the chase. Now, as a trophy hunter, people often dislike that. But for some reason, I guess I get a pass because I never kill anything, it seems. But anything with a recurve is a trophy. And so as the sun began to sink so low that the light was beginning to fade faster and faster, I was hopeful that maybe the buck might come back out to the field and pass my blind. The law of nature is survival of the fittest. Hunting is not easy. It is not supposed to be easy. Survival of the fittest. Now there are easier ways of doing things than the way that I do them. And I don't have to bring a camera into the woods with me to complicate my experience. But I do so in order to tell you a hunting story. So I hope that you guys have enjoyed this Tex Grebner Outdoors adventure. And I hope I live long enough to see next season. Because life ain't like the pornos, and hunting ain't like the TV shows. As always, God bless all my sportsmen of America. Join the NRA to protect our rights. Please check out my friends over at SOETacticalRadio.com. Thank you very much to those of you involved in law enforcement and those of you served in the military. Thanks for watching Tex Grebner Outdoors.